This edition of 10 Eyewitness News is proudly brought to you by Nissan Maxima. First in news, this is 10 Eyewitness News with Anne Fulwood.
Good evening. In the 10 Eyewitness News tonight, Prime Minister Keating ties the friendship knot with President Suharto, an oil slick on the Great Barrier Reef. And how much is a chief executive worth?
I think I've read of figures up to $80 million. Is that possible?
Stronger defence ties are in the offing between Australia and Indonesia. It's all part of Prime Minister Keating's plan to forge a common bond with our northern neighbour, and it comes after an all-important meeting with President Suharto.
The centrepiece of Mr Keating's visit, a 2-hour meeting with President Suharto. Both sides say it was a great success. Both leaders witnessed the signing of 3 economic and legal agreements. They come as Indonesia, at our suggestion, will hold regular ministerial forums, a sign of even closer ties. At his news conference, Mr Keating maintained our government's acceptance of Indonesia's handling of the November Dili massacre inquiry.
The response by the government was more credible than we might have expected immediately in the aftermath of those events.
While Mr Keating is critical of the Army's role in East Timor, he has no such criticism of its potential as an ally in regional defence. In a speech marking the end of the Jakarta leg, the Prime Minister praises Indonesia's contribution to 25 years of regional stability and signals Australia's willingness to strengthen bilateral defence relations. Paul Bongiorno in Jakarta, 10 Eyewitness News.
The Great Barrier Reef is awash with black sludge from oil deliberately dumped from a passing ship. Authorities say it's one of the most serious oil spills ever seen in the area.
As far as oil slicks go, this one's by no means a monster, but you're looking at about 5 tons of heavy oil. The mess is more than 20 kilometres long and 3 wide. The oil was spotted early yesterday in a very remote area, Temple Bay, about 600 kilometres north of Cairns. Already it's washed onto parts of the Barrier Reef. It's threatening a colony of seabirds and it could poison coral and mangroves. The slick probably didn't get there by accident. Authorities have a fair idea which ship dumped it by cleaning out its ballast tanks. Dumping oil is illegal and it can be very expensive. Offenders face $1 million fine. But the simple fact is that doesn't stop ships from washing out their tanks at sea.
Commercial shipping has known for 20 years that this is illegal. It's just been going on and on. In fact, they seem to be even more frequent in the last few years.
Conservationists reckon oil is washed overboard in Australian waters at least once a month, and they say the reason so many ships get away with it is because the coast is not policed enough.
It's like road accidents. We're never going to be able to outlaw road accidents. Likewise, we're never going to outlaw irresponsible behaviour, but we can certainly penalise it. $1 million fines are very tough indeed.
Maritime officers are keeping an eye on this latest oil slick. It's hoped rising winds will break it up over the next few days. A ship suspected of dumping the oil is due in Mackay tomorrow. Its tanks will be tested. Greg Quayle, 10 Eyewitness News.
The Nauru-backed bid for Compass Airlines has gone public with its revival scheme. Hundreds of Compass shareholders, staff and creditors met today to hear what Ostfin could do for them, and many were disappointed.
This is Duke Minks. If he has his way, he'll be the head of a born-again Compass Airlines. He heads up Ostfin, the Compass bidder backed by the government of the Pacific Island nation of Nauru. Today he called a meeting of those affected by the Compass collapse in a bid to gain their support.
Can you name the board members of your proposed airline?
But his attempts were met with questions ranging from his credibility to the value of shares under his plan.
In other words, they're still worthless.
Well, the question, I mean, Ferry hasn't spelled out in his proposal.
No, I'm asking you, mate.
Okay.
What Ostfin wants to do.
The Ostfin offer to shareholders is a 10% discount on fares for 3 years. Today, the saga sits with liquidator Ian Ferrier. He's done a deal with Southern Cross Airlines to get Compass in the air again, a deal that's had public support from the state government but may not go ahead. Southern Cross has to find $50 million by Monday. Mr Mink says his deal is already underwritten by the Nauru government, whose finance minister will sit on the board. And he says if he doesn't get Compass, he'll start up another airline anyway. This afternoon, Mr Minks met with state government ministers to brief them on his proposal. Jeff Mullins, 10 Eyewitness News.
Fire has destroyed an Adelaide landmark. St Luke's Anglican Church in the centre of the city went up in flames around 7:30 tonight. Fire crews were helpless, trying to save the largely timber structure that has stood in Whitmore Square since 1856. The church was heritage listed. A tragic accident in the nation's capital today claimed the lives of 2 young children. They were playing in a cardboard box at a new housing estate when they were hit by a concrete truck.
The first families began moving into their new homes only yesterday. A packing case became a cubby house for a 7-year-old boy and his 4-year-old sister. A concrete truck following a roughly defined track ran over the cardboard box, killing the children instantly. The driver was treated for shock. Controversy over a recommendation by AIDS authorities that condom vending machines outlawed at Queensland University 5 years ago should now be installed in all Australian high schools.
The idea of selling condoms at the same place that you're teaching young children about values in relation to sex is the wrong thing.
The move to permit condom vending machines is based on the view that most senior high school students are sexually active.
It's better to be safe than catch AIDS.
It will be up to state governments to decide if they want condom vending machines in schools. Today, South Australia's Education Minister Greg Crafter rejected such a plan. In Melbourne, peace protester Robert James Burrows turned up with a spade, pot plant and Aboriginal flag when he appeared in the federal court over his refusal to pay income tax because he says the money is spent on military weapons. Owing the tax department $8,000, 39-year-old Burrows was declared bankrupt last year. Today he was found guilty of contempt of court for refusing to provide information about his finances, but he escaped a jail sentence and fine. Graham Kavanagh, 10 Eyewitness News.
When we return, putting a price on a CEO's head and how LA law is affecting our legal eagles.
So a number of students that say, oh, well, because I became a fan of LA law and suddenly decided to do law. It's rather terrifying to think that's the reason.
A helicopter has crashed into the sea and sunk off Fremantle in Western Australia. The pilot and a passenger were on a photographic assignment when they were forced to ditch into the ocean. They escaped unhurt and were picked up by the sail training ship, the Lewin. The New South Wales Jobs for the Boys crisis has taken a bizarre new twist. The man at the centre of the affair, former Cabinet Minister Terry Metherell, slipped past reporters at Sydney Airport tonight, telling police he'd had a death threat.
Even before Terry Metherell's flight from Vanuatu touched down at Sydney Airport, a media pack had formed. But the key figure in the Greiner government's Jobs for the Boys crisis was able to give journalists the slip. Federal Airport Authority staff gave Metherell VIP treatment after being told there were threats against his life. Earlier, independent MP John Hatton announced he plans to censure the government when the New South Wales Parliament resumes on Tuesday. He's warned it could extend to a motion of no confidence, threatening the government's future.
Mr Greiner is in grave peril. His leadership is in question. His judgment is in question. Next Tuesday will be D-Day.
With the Labor opposition set to push ahead with legislation to block Terry Metherell's job without compensation, Premier Greiner and his Environment Minister Tim Moore are planning talks with the independents in a bid to avoid a parliamentary showdown. Paul Mullins, 10 Eyewitness News.
LA law is coming to Australia. The syndrome, that is. The high-flying image and the high fees are now a reality in this country, but at the other extreme, the legal aid service is running out of money. And today both issues were the focus of a parliamentary inquiry.
The Senate Standing Committee on Legal Affairs saw two sides of the real-life show that is Australian law. In the first tough, gritty episode, the legal aid system that's available to prisoners and poor people plunges into financial crisis. Already, the average Australian earns too much money to qualify for legal aid. Now the recession dramatically cuts funding just when it's most needed.
We had the best legal aid system in this country. I don't think we have today. Other reasons for that. We've run out of money.
But the second episode of Australian law is much more glamorous, just like the TV shows.
A number of students that say, oh, well, because I became a fan of LA law and suddenly decided to do law. It's rather terrifying to think that's the reason.
The committee heard that a majority of university students take up law because of the high fees they'll earn. But this fantasy world is just one cause of a blowout in legal costs. Lawyers admitted that costs are rising because hundreds of expensive court cases often have to be retried due to mistakes by judges, lawyers and a legal system that's too complex. And lawyers must learn to resolve cases rather than fight them.
I think there's become a culture, is let's litigate everything. Let's fight to the death.
But the knives are out for the LA law-style version of our legal system. The Trade Practices Commission will now investigate the legal profession and its costs. Paul Smith, 10 Eyewitness News.
In business news, farmers are proving reluctant to apply for the special government handouts introduced earlier this year. The Business Review Weekly's Robert Gottliebson reports.
Traditionally, the Australian farmer is an independent and proud person. Nevertheless, the government has been surprised that only 83 of Australia's 46,000 grain farmers have applied for special crop planting assistance. Under the plan, if a viable farmer could not get finance for crop planting, the government was prepared to subsidise his interest bill. The program was widely promoted, but any farmer who applied for aid would have to show how he'd been knocked back by the big banks. Surprise, surprise, Australia's banks have been much more active in the rural sector during the last 6 months. But at the same time, prospects in rural Australia have improved following rises in wool and wheat prices and the breaking of the drought in New South Wales and Queensland. And to emphasise how farmers dislike social service handouts, the measures to give them better access to unemployment benefits have also received only a small number of applications. Meanwhile, better trading conditions also extend to aluminium producers. Comalco reports that although first quarter profits are down 60% on last year, profits for calendar 1992 are expected to be below 1991. But in recent months, earnings have improved and are better than forecast, reflecting higher aluminium prices and a lower Australian dollar. To Japan, and after early falls, the Nikkei index rose slightly to end the day 50 points higher. Our own All Ordinaries index rose 11 points, led by BHP, Brambles, Coles Myer and National Australia Bank, but CRA and News Corporation declined. The Australian dollar eased and closed at 76.35 US cents. This is Robert Gottliebson.
And in other finance on the London markets this morning, gold trading around $338.50. The FT100 is down a little at the opening. And in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng closed the day up nearly 100 points to 51.89.03. The most unpopular people in the US at the moment may well be the chief executive officers of many corporations. On average, they pay themselves $3.2 million a year. But when the returns are down, that raises questions among employees and shareholders.
The citadel of capitalism, Wall Street, found itself in Fat City in 1991. Morgan Stanley gave its chairman, president, and chief operating officer more than $8 million each. Merrill Lynch's chairman, William Schreier, received a package worth nearly $17 million. But even that's eclipsed by the $80 million present value of the package earned by Coke's Roberto Goizueta. He's a high performer, so shareholders didn't murmur. But some CEOs in other countries gulped.
I think in the United States, some of the figures have been astronomical. I think I've read of figures up to $80 million. Is that possible? That is an obscene amount of money for a year's salaried work.
The Imperial boardroom is beginning to hear the shouts in the street. After rough years at Avon, the CEO's salary was frozen to rebuild management's credibility.
To ensure that we could look every shareholder or potential shareholder in the eye and say, our interests are exactly the same as yours. We aren't going to prosper unless you prosper.
Having world-class products is only half the story.
And in some executive suites, pay downsizing has become politically correct. Chrysler's Lee Iacocca was throttled back by a 35% cut in 1991, but his package was still worth about $3 million. John Akers of IBM took a 26% cut, according to one pay expert, but his package was still worth an estimated $5.5 million. And IT&T's Rand Araskog, who earned $11.5 million in 1990, had a 1991 pay package worth $7.5 million.
If CEO pay is out of whack, it may be because typically CEOs don't leave the boardroom when their compensation package is discussed. They appoint the compensation committee, which takes its recommendations from the pay consultant, who's hired by, you guessed, the CEO.
Says it all. When Eyewitness News continues, the gun battle's raging in Sarajevo, and Charles Manson still crazy after all these years.
And I'm out, man, and I'm
all around. I'm down the San Diego Zoo, and I'm riding a motorcycle, and I'm your children, and I'm the trees, and
In overseas news, heavy fighting continues unabated in Bosnia-Herzegovina tonight. It's particularly vicious in the capital, Sarajevo, where journalists are trapped in one of the city's main hotels. A British cameraman is among the wounded.
There's a group of resort hotels in Parkland out here to the west of the city, which had been a relatively secure base for the press and for the European community observers. But we awoke this morning to find ourselves in the front line. This was the one Serbian enclave in town from which no attack had been launched and which had not itself been attacked until this morning. Then the fighting started early and it has raged intensively ever since. There are no fixed positions. It's a battle of fire and movement. The incoming fire is from a Muslim community about 500 yards away. Through the fire, we did venture out to the city centre, which is much quieter than it was yesterday, although heavy fighting is said to have raged there last night. This morning, the centre of the battle has moved to Ilija, where it is still continuing, and the Serbs, very much on the defensive, have brought up what armour they have to save the day.
Helter-skelter killer Charles Manson says he didn't break God's law and he didn't break man's law. But would you believe him? The California Parole Board doesn't, and today denied him parole for the 8th time.
Charles Manson seemed to sense from the start that this parole board would not be setting him free.
each one of you is somebody. I am nobody. I'm nothing. I'm now. I've been now all my life. My mother went to prison and left me. And everybody's lied to me.
But there was no sympathy for Manson from the man who helped convict him nearly 23 years ago. Attorney Stephen Kay reminded the parole board how Manson gathered a family of misfits around him, misfits who went on a killing spree for him, killing actress Sharon Tate and 8 others in one of the most gruesome mass murders ever. Manson, who years ago carved a swastika in his forehead, said he had no remorse for the killings. He denied any responsibility for the crimes. At times, he sounded angry as he talked to the parole board. At times, he sounded odd.
I'm everywhere, and I'm out and in, and I'm all around. I'm down the San Diego Zoo, and I'm riding a motorcycle, and I'm your children, and I'm the trees, and I'm the clouds.
Hold it up.
I'm crazy, and...
But occasionally, he gave a flash of his old arrogance.
I'm the man in here. And that's a fact.
But Manson lost this round as the board decided against parole. His next parole date won't be for another 5 years, when Charles Manson turned 62.
California killer Robert Harris was executed last night, a death as violent as his birth. The 39-year-old double murderer exhausted all his appeals overnight and was gassed in a chamber at San Quentin prison. According to court records, Harris was born more than 2 months premature after his father kicked his pregnant mother. At 15 months of age, his father tried to murder him, and as a teenager, his mother dumped him on a highway and abandoned him, driving off with the rest of the family. Harris killed 2 boys in 1978. Still to come, Ray Wilkie's weather outlook and Wacko Jacko in the closet. At least it sounds that way. Now here's Ray Wilkie with the weather.
Thank you, Anne, and hello everybody. Well, very cold weather in the southeastern states by night and by day. Temperatures down there 0 degrees at Canberra, Orange, Perisher -8 if you're up in the hills there, and by day temperatures down there 15, 16 degrees. Now there are a few showers from about Wollongong along the New South Wales coast and of course into the tablelands, increasing as you go north. Brisbane had a few showers, and across the southeastern part of Queensland, far north coast of Queensland fine. There was a shower in Darwin today, just over 1 millimetre of rain. Perth, beautiful and fine again. Showers in the Alice Springs area. Well, that's about it. Let's look at the clouds that produced all of these. You can see this line of cloud here is broken up, and the cloud has remained in the Alice Springs area, bringing a few showers. Matter of fact, that cloud must be thick because the max there was only 19 today. Here you can see the cloud is here producing unsettled weather with a bit of rain, and that cloud will eventually move out over there overnight. Let's have a look therefore at the chart. This change here has edged up the New South Wales coast, causing unsettled weather up in that area, mostly in the northern rivers and the northeastern part of New South Wales. This high therefore is now covering most of the continent with fine, dry and fairly cool, you could almost say cold weather. Let's see tomorrow's chart. Well, the high will continue moving slowly eastwards. This change will
much the same as dormant out here, but a little low will develop there, and of course that's going to stir the pot there, so there'll be showers along the New South Wales coast, pretty general in the northern rivers, and the high cloud getting out from southeastern Queensland. The forecast chart. Sydney will have a few showers, Brisbane will have rain overnight and clearing tomorrow, a few showers, and Darwin a storm, and that's about it. But still cold in the southeast.
Thanks, Ray. Michael Jackson's latest offering is about to be released, a love story set in the heart of Africa. However, the Australian distributors are threatening to sue anyone who broadcasts the video before it's released this weekend.
Michael, Naomi, here we go.
While we can't show you the actual video, these pictures shot on the set give the basic idea. Another top model, Naomi Campbell, the telltale Jackson hips, and doubtless another smash hit for Wacko Jacko.
He's just really sweet, shy and down to earth.
Fashion photographer Herb Ritz directed the 6-minute video, Michael Jackson's biggest deal since signing on as the marketing arm of the Pepsi-Cola company. A deal almost eclipsed by Madonna's new arrangement with Time Warner. She becomes a company and takes home $75 million over 7 years.
Watch your shadows on her legs. Here we go.
No one's saying how much the In the Closet video cost or just what Michael Jackson had in mind with that title. It's steamy, we're told, but G-rated. And it sounds something like this.
She wants to give it all. She wants to give it. She wants to give it all. She wants to give it.
Laurie Patton, 10 Eyewitness News.
That's our Clayton's video. And that's 10 Eyewitness News for now. The next news will be the first of the day at 6 in the morning with Ron Wilson. And then on Good Morning Australia, which car protects you the best in an accident? Also the master of the macabre, Stephen King, on his new horror thriller. And the good oil on the mysterious world of male models. That's all on Good Morning Australia. Coming up next here on 10, the rugby test between the All Blacks and the World 15. I'll be back tomorrow night, so I'll see you then. I'm Anne Fullwood. Good night.
This edition of 10 Eyewitness News was proudly brought to you by Nissan Maxima.
Legal agreements. They come as Indonesia, at our suggestion, will hold regular ministerial forums, a sign of even closer ties. At his news conference, Mr. Keating maintained our government's acceptance of Indonesia's handling of the November Dili massacre inquiry.
The response by the government was more credible than we might have expected immediately in the aftermath of those events.
While Mr. Keating is critical of the Army's role in East Timor, he has no such criticism of its potential as an ally in regional...
An oil slick on the Great Barrier Reef. And how much is a chief executive worth?
I think I've read of figures up to $80 million. Is that possible?
Stronger defence ties are in the offing between Australia and Indonesia. It's all part of Prime Minister Keating's plan to forge a common bond with our northern neighbour, and it comes after an all-important meeting with President Suharto.
The centrepiece of Mr. Keating's visit, a 2-hour meeting with President Suharto. Both sides say it was a great success. Both leaders witnessed the signing of 3 economic...
This edition of 10 Eyewitness News is proudly brought to you by Nissan Maxima. First in news, this is 10 Eyewitness News with Anne Fullwood.
Good evening. In the 10 Eyewitness News tonight, Prime Minister Keating ties the friendship knot with President Suharto.
The defence. In a speech marking the end of the Jakarta leg, the Prime Minister praises Indonesia's contribution to 25 years of regional stability and signals Australia's willingness to strengthen bilateral defence relations. Paul Bongiorno in Jakarta, 10 Eyewitness News.
The Great Barrier Reef is awash with black sludge from oil deliberately dumped from a passing ship. Authorities say it's one of the most serious oil spills ever seen in the area.
As far as oil slicks go, this one's by no means a monster, but you're looking at about 5 tons of heavy oil. The mess is more than 20 kilometres long and 3 wide. The oil was spotted early yesterday in a very remote area, Temple Bay, about 600 kilometres north of Cairns. Already it's washed onto parts of the Barrier Reef. It's threatening a colony of seabirds and it could poison coral and mangroves. The slick probably didn't get there by accident. Authorities have a fair idea which ship dumped it by cleaning out its ballast tanks. Dumping oil is illegal and it can be very expensive. Offenders face $1 million fine. But the simple